All right. Hi, friends. Can people hear me? I have some background noise, and I hope that stuff that I'm saying is coming through. I am not adding people into this video because I have 10 minutes to do my thing. But awesome. I'm talking about a painting that I'm working on. It's in the background here. I'll move that because my phone is on a tripod. So I'm going to work on it a little bit. I just went over the outline with Sharpie and I'm filling it in with more black acrylic ink. And I'm going to talk to people about my conceptual process for this for a few minutes, and then also the technical process of making it and the decisions that I made. So I'm Hayes. I make a lot of different mediums of art, and I talk about that in my interview with Haye that I think is either on their blog today or it will be soon. I'm also talking about trauma in painting and art. So I started making this painting over the summer and writing out what I wanted it to be after I was trying to communicate with my partner my experience with complex trauma, which basically just means long-term trauma and what that does to your brain, because it's different than an acute or a sudden trauma. And I'm going to paint a little bit and fill in stuff while I do this. But for example, we all hear that like war veterans have PTSD. They can develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So that would be more of like an acute trauma. Like say that a kid grows up in like a healthy, happy family and they do really well in school and they like generally have friends and a good support system, and they join the military and then they're suddenly hit with all of this trauma and like violence, and they develop like an acute form of PTSD. Complex trauma is more like people who went through abuse as a child, who were around a lot of drug use or substance abuse, who went through sexual abuse or assault as a young person, as an adolescent, as an adult. So like long-term traumatic relationships. And I was trying to explain to people that I love basically that when they wanted me to be happy and to work on myself, which like everyone wants to do, but especially in quarantine, like I think everyone was talking about using this time to better yourself in some way. And when my partner and friends would talk about like how they wanted me to be happy and like take care of myself, I felt very at a loss because I didn't know what that looked like or what people wanted from me. And so I started journaling about it a lot and working on other art pieces, trying to put words on this feeling I had of not understanding what this like happiness and fulfillment process other people were talking about was when I was dealing with trauma, because a lot of people have traumatic events in their life, and in mine. But the process of moving on from it isn't the same for everybody. And so what I ended up writing down and journaling for a different art piece at the time that then became this painting was, I wish I could tell people that when I was a child, I had fallen to the bottom of a well and just hadn't climbed out. And that metaphor was because I heard so often as an adolescent and as a child by different counselors and therapists and like friends and friends' parents who meant well that, you know, mental illness or like trauma, it's like going through a tunnel. You know, I think everyone who's like had a hard time with depression or anxiety has had someone say this metaphor to them where they're like, you know there was light before the tunnel, now you're going through a dark time, and you know that if you keep going, you're going to come out the other side. And the well theory that I wrote down was my interpretation of that, but if you don't know that there was light before this, because when you have complex and long-term trauma, like in your childhood and going into adulthood, you don't have this foundation of light that's previous. You just start in the middle of all of this. And it's almost like my own adapted version of Plato's allegory of the cave that I was trying to communicate to people, because, you know, if you're born in this cave, you live in this cave, you see, you know, trauma, you see mental illness, abuse, so much of your life, then it doesn't feel like you're going through a hard time within a tunnel where you have this previous knowledge that, like, there's good in the world. It just feels like you're sitting like you're just sitting in the darkness that you've always known, and this, like, future joy or, like, healthy outcome, it isn't as simple as just walking through a tunnel. It's an entirely new, complex process, like hoisting yourself up out of a well with no rails into a light that is unknown. You don't know what's going on there. So this painting is a single panel that has words put onto it without any, like, graphic images or anything of trauma, and then there's going to be a second panel that has the second part of the phrase that I wrote out underneath it. And I can talk about the technical process for a couple minutes while I still have people. Yes, I am keeping it pretty short, but I go a little bit more into depth on how I started using art to communicate through trauma and what I was going through in the interview with Haye. But when I was making this, I knew that I didn't want to make a realistic painting. I wanted to make something that was a little bit cartoony and jovial and caustic, because I really don't like putting out more trauma porn, like, into the world, which I know some people know that phrase and some people don't. But basically, I don't want to depict every trauma that I've ever been through or every bad thing that's ever happened in my life or even every good thing that's happened in my life. I want to construe a feeling to people without having to show any of that, and I feel like that's the challenge for sure. And so I have this kind of surreal font design that I actually picked up making comics when I was very young, around 16 or 17, to deal with my dissociation and kind of the surreal way that I was viewing things at the time. And so there's a random smattering of capital letters and lowercase letters, and they're all squished together in this style that I created to, like, portray how I was feeling. And the only letters that are routinely not capitalized are I's, usually proper I's in this case, and then I have this layer of this, like, incredibly caustic yellow going on behind it. That was kind of inspired by fantasy and a way to remove the audience from what's being talked about, which I've done in some of my film projects as well. I've done a few short film installations where I always use imagery that is not related to or depicting any traumatic event that I went through, but I'm discussing it as a way to remove people from it and allow them to take in the information that I'm presenting. And people can ask questions and things here, but I only have, like, two I have a few minutes left. This is a very short just window into what I'm working on and what I'm doing. And then obviously you can find me on my pages, and then you can read my interview with Haye and see this when it all comes out, when it's finished. I think everyone... Okay, I'll wait, but I'll just keep painting. My Instagram is Fistful of Hate. I think that I'm tagged in the Art Bytes post. You can find me there and see some of the other stuff that I'm doing. I lost a lot of my photos of my artwork, but I have illustrations and then writing zines of both poetry and prose. And then I have this painting that I'm working on that I'll hopefully be able to install, like, in my apartment to show fully once it's done. All right. Hopefully I covered everything and gave people a little bit of an idea of what I make and what I'm working on, and a different experience for artists that not everyone sees. Thanks, y'all. And thank you to Hive as well for letting me do this and featuring me on their website and on their blog, where I still don't really give the full story, but I go into more detail about how I started making this art and where you can find me and what my other zines and things are about, what they're going to be discussing and which ones I've already made. All right, thank you.